This computer.
Recording in progress.
There we go. Okay. So this week's Mishnah really presents an incredible idea. Which I think is important in general to not just to the concept of learning Torah, but to many other concepts in our lives. So the Mishnah says as follows. Remember, this is the chapter of Kinyan Torah, of the acquisition of Torah, and what's being dealt with in this chapter is the beauty and importance of Torah and the attraction to Torah, the connection to Torah. So here the Mishnah gives us the way in which a person has to acquire Torah. And it says, Kachi Darka Shel Torah. This is the way of life of the Torah. Pas b'melach tochal, that your bread has to be eaten with salt. Umayim b'mesura tishta, and water has to be drunk sparingly. V'ala oretz tishon, and sleep on the floor. V'chayit tsar tichya, and a life of tsar you should live, a life of pain or deprivation you should live. U'b'torah ato amel, but your amelus, your entire work has to be in the Torah. I'm just going to read and translate the Mishnah first, then I'm going to clearly ask questions. Im ato osakein, and if you do this, ashrecha v'tovlach, it's going to be good for you, and tovlach. Ashrecha means you're fortunate, and tovlach means that it's going to be good for you. Ashrecha ba'olam hazeh, it's going to be fortunate for you in this world. V'tovlach, and it's going to be good for you la'olam haba, in the world to come. There is not one part of this Mishnah that doesn't either offend the natural senses, or when you look at it, you say to yourself, that is clearly not the picture of Judaism that I was ever presented. It's not clearly not what we seem to espouse. A life of tsar, a life of pain, a life of deprivation. That we have to drink water, sleep on the ground, and do these kinds of things which really causing us pain. Is that really something that is practice, something that is obligatory, something that we live by? Plus, you have to ask the question: is this Mishnah presenting me with a mitzvah, or is this Mishnah presenting me with a concept, with a lifestyle? In other words, is this an obligation that I have, that I must do this in order to be able to grow in Torah? I mean, all those years I was drinking Diet Pepsi. I mean, it's I got it wrong. Umayim b'misura tishta. You have to drink water in a little bit of water. You have to drink it in a rationed kind of way. What exactly is being presented here? And why is that true? Why do I need to drink a little bit of water, sleep on the floor, and eat only a little bit of bread in order to be able to excel in Torah? Who says that I'm not allowed to enjoy that which God placed in the world? God placed food in the world. He placed, why did God create 100 different types of apples? Yeah, it wasn't just to make us crazy that when our wives tell us to go to the supermarket and buy apples, that we have to stand there and go, apples. Okay, right? That's not why he created so many apples. So why then we're not allowed to participate in that? That's what it says. A person who's a Torah person is not, it seems, no, you got to go down the water aisle. And that's enough to make you crazy, right? Because there you have waters with hashkacha, without hashkacha, waters with the spritz, without the spritz, with the flavor, without the flavor. You have every kind of water, distilled water, this kind of water. What's going on? Okay. Is asceticism a value in Judaism? Now, we know that the closest to an ascetic that we have in our mitzvah structure in Judaism, a thing called a nazir. A nazir is a Nazirite. It's called the Naziritic vow. A person wants to take a vow in order to be able to abstain from drinking wine. They see in themselves that the wine is taking them to a bad place. They don't have the strength to be able to say, I'm just going to, I think I'm going to cut out wine for a little while. And they see that living a life of mundanity is getting them into trouble. So they become a nazir. They take a vow. The nazir can't drink wine or eat wine, wine products. A nazir can't go to the cemetery, can't become impure. So he has to live his life on a elevated level of purity. And he can't cut his hair. can't preen himself. So he's disconnecting himself in a way, a nazir after a couple of weeks. We always joke around when the kid's hair gets too long, so we say, "Oh, you're being a nazir," right? It's like, but and it's like a real thing, because we don't have it nowadays. But that this idea of letting the hair grow long, it sort of disconnects you from the rest of the society. People look at you and they look at you like you're odd. So they look at you like you're odd. So there's a certain disconnection. When the nazir, the normal stint of a naziritic stint is a 30-day stint. And for 30 days, the nazir lives this way. There happens to be a thing called the nazir Shimshon. If you remember Shimshon, Samson the Mighty, Samson the Mighty had very long hair. Well, he was a nazir. And he was what's called a nazir olam. That's why he had long hair. It wasn't just like that was the style, or he was a hippie. Right, Shimshon the hippie. Shimshon had long hair because he was a nazir. He was a Nazirite, and a Nazirite doesn't cut his hair. He was a different status of a Nazirite. He was called the Nazir Olam. He was a Nazirite forever. But generally, a Nazirite, they're 30-day stints. So a Nazir can take upon himself the vow of the Naziritic vow. He can take it on himself for 30 days. He can take it on for 120 days. Take it on for whatever multiple he wants. But that's the standard. If he says, I want to be a Nazir, standard Nazir is 30 days. There are certain times where he's obligated to be a Nazir. For example, we've learned that there are two parshas in the Torah that are next to each other. One parsha is the parsha of Nazir, right? The whole discussion of the Nazir. And the other section of the Torah is the section of the Torah that deals with a suspected adulteress. So the Talmud tells us that the suspected adulteress is a very difficult parsha, very difficult section in Torah. We have to take this lady up to whose husband tells her not to be alone in the room with someone, and she goes alone, locks the door. There are witnesses outside that they were sequestered in a room, in a locked room for a certain amount of time, which in halachic terms then puts a suspicion after a certain amount of time that there could technically be a consummation of the relationship. So then that puts the suspicion on this on this lady, and therefore a suspicion and a doubt on her marriage as to whether she can continue to stay married and to live with her husband. So she has to go up and to the temple, and she has to drink a special potion, and if she is in fact an adulteress, so then she dies there. Her stomach becomes distended, and she basically explodes. And if not, so then if she was not an adulteress, so then she's given many, many blessings. God bestows on her many blessings. Okay, I'm not getting into that parsha. What in the world is that doing there? I'm not getting into that right now. But that's the parsha of Sota. So the rabbis ask, what are those two parshas doing next to each other? Why do we have the parsha of Sota and the parsha of Nazir? They're juxtaposed next to each other in the Torah. And that's a valid question, according to many authorities. It's a valid question to ask in the Torah. Why is this juxtaposed next to the other? And the answer the Talmud gives is that because if a man sees someone die on top of the altar, so then he has to take a vow, a Naziritic vow, because he has to recognize that this is what wine and looseness, where it leads to adultery, it leads to these things, and leads to suspicions of adultery, and therefore Yazir Atzmo Minayayin, he has to take a vow for a certain amount of time, for 30 days. He has to take a vow against wine. Now the truth is that guy shouldn't be the guy that has to take the vow. The guy that has to, because that guy saw some lady explode on top of the altar in the middle of Jerusalem. That's a little freaky. That guy, the next time you tell him, hey, you want to mess around? No, not me. Thank you very much. I'm good. Right? And he saw, he had this experience. He was there. It was traumatic and dramatic. He's not going to fall down. So the guy who really should be taking that vow, the Naziritic vow, that's the guy who never saw this, who maybe heard the news, maybe read it in the newspaper, maybe somebody told him that this thing happened in Jerusalem. So for that guy needs to pound it into his head, this is bad behavior, so then he should become a Nazir. So rabbis explained that no, the guy who never saw it, he never saw it. He never had that trauma. He never watched it. He doesn't need that strong of a reaction. But the guy that saw it, he can easily. We have this incredible ability to be able to wipe things away from our mind, to be able to sort of live in denial and to say, yeah, whatever, to sublimate it and to knock it out of our system. And that's the guy we're worried about, the guy who had the experience, because that guy doesn't get a second chance to be moved. He's already seen it, sees it a second time, it's not going to have the same kind of effect on him. And therefore, unless at that very moment he does something to staple that in, he does something to knock that into his head, so then it's in a few days the whole thing is going to be gone. The chance that this could have been a learning experience, that this could have been a teaching moment, is gone, and it's never going to come back. And for that reason, he has to make himself a nazir. Okay, so we see there's a place in the Torah even where we're demanded to become a nazir, where we're obligated to become a nazir. However, when the nazir finishes his 30-day stint, or whatever number he chose, at the end of that stint he has to bring sacrifices. And part of the sacrifices that he has to bring is that he has to bring a sin offering. A sin offering. Now, why would you have to bring a sin offering? A guy who just wants to be a little more religious, a guy who wants a frum experience, right? He just wants to, he doesn't feel like he has the strength to be able to control himself by himself, and he feels that he needs a little bit of an outside push, right? In other words, he basically needs something to convince him that he should live on this kind of holy level. So he takes the Naziritic stint. We're calling that guy, he has to bring a chatas, he has to bring a sin offering. Now the truth is, we call this guy Kodesh Lashem. We look at it, the Torah loves this. The Torah says the guy's holy to God. He's in a very, very holy place. Well then, if that's the case, so then why is he bringing a chatas? So our rabbis tell us the reason he has to bring a sin offering is because he prohibited something that the Torah permitted to him. The Torah never prohibited wine. The Torah never prohibited going into a cemetery. The Torah never prohibited cutting his hair. And he took pleasures of this world and he made those pleasures prohibited on himself. That's sinful behavior. To take God's beautiful world and to make that world prohibited, to turn it into something that's asur, something that's asa, that's forbidden, that's not a positive thing. Well, if that's the case, this Mishnah becomes even more difficult now. Because the way we view a nazir, he's holy to God, but in the end he had to prohibit things in order to be able to control himself. He had to prohibit things that God had already said were permissible. That's not great behavior. How then can we say that this is the way that a person has to learn Torah? Pas b'melach tochal, he has to eat his bread with salt, he has to drink a little bit of water, sleep on the ground. If a nazir, who all he did was he prohibited wine and he prohibited impurity from himself and he prohibited from becoming impure and he didn't cut his hair, if that guy is called a chote, if that guy is called a sinner, then somebody who cuts out big chunks, he's cutting out food, he's cutting out drink, he's cutting out comfort, alachas kam v'kama, how much more so? So this Mishnah is very, very difficult to understand. Not only what the Mishnah is trying to teach me, but just the practical of this Mishnah. How is it even possible to have such a statement, whether it's a mitzvah or a suggestion? How is it possible to have to have this kind of statement? Plus, we know, when we put back the Torah, and there was a diracheha darchei noam, that his ways are ways of pleasantness. V'chol nesivoseh shalom, and all of its pathways are peace. If the Torah is not feeling peaceful to you, that means you're doing it wrong. Because diracheha darchei noam, this is not just a beautiful song that we sing with a great tune, right? Some drama from the Chazan. This is the very core of the way we relate to the Torah. Diracheha darchei noam. Its ways are ways of pleasantness. It doesn't just dictate to us that when we present Torah, we have to present it in a pleasant way. That when we talk to people as representatives of Torah, we have to talk in a pleasant way. Diracheha darchei noam means that everything about the Torah is beautiful. Everything about the Torah is amazing. Everything about the Torah is pleasant. If you're finding something in the Torah that's not pleasant, some practice, some mitzvah, something that we're doing, we're finding it that it's filling us with anxiety, so then we're doing it wrong. Because it couldn't be filling us with anxiety, because deracha darchei noam. Again, if that's the case, we don't bring suffering on ourselves. We don't suffer when we keep mitzvahs. How is it possible to say that to learn Torah, you have to say v'chaye tsa'ar tichya, that a life of pain you have to live? That doesn't sound like my Torah. That doesn't sound like deracha darchei noam. Okay, I think we get it, that this Mishna is clearly not presenting what we think it's presenting. Because if it's presenting what we think it's presenting, so then it's antithetical to really the foundations and the basics of Torah. Rather, what the Mishnah is teaching us a pathway, not a lifestyle. What that means is that this is not the way that a Torah person has to live. But there are times where we have to limit our connection to Olam Hazeh, to this world, so that we can accomplish something greater. Now, sometimes we need to focus, and we can't be distracted by material things that naturally get in our way. This is clear, I think, to anyone that has gone to school, gone to medical school, has gone to other professional school, right? Gone to law school. In those years, when you have to, there's an amazing amount of material you have to learn. You have to climb a mountain to be able to get to a place of knowledge in order to be able to practice what you want to practice. And in order to be able to do that, that there is a certain amount, and I'm going to use the word deprivation, but not with any kind of negativity to it, but there's a certain amount, you got to prioritize. And there are things that have to be cut out. Those are not the years that you're going to be able to sow your oats. Those are not the years that you're going to be able to do certain things, because you just simply can't. A person looks at their life, 20, 21, 22, right? I would love to go traveling, love to do anything. But if you're going to medical school, or you're going to law school, right? You're taking a degree in psychology, right? You're getting a PhD in psychology. Those are not the vacation years, right? Those are not the years where you can be running around the world and you're going to be, you're going to be living the life at Riley for a little while, sowing your oats, because there we require a focus. The Mishnah is not telling me that in order to be able to excel in Torah, you need to deprive yourself. What it's saying is that there are times where we need to focus on Torah. There are times where we need to get ourselves to a place, and this is true not just of Torah, but in general, there are times where we have to prioritize, where we have to look at our lives and say, what really is a priority for me? If I want to accomplish this, then what is my priority? Look, a person's got health issues, and they know that they want to beat the health issues. So they focus on those health issues. They focus on the things they need to do, and some of the other things that they have enjoyed doing, they have to fall to the wayside. That's just the way it is. The Mishnah is teaching me that this is what has to happen, and if it means that we have to get to the place of sometimes where you have to really limit things, then you need to do that. Because if the goal is to achieve something, so then the only way to achieve a goal is to focus on that goal. That's the reason why we call a lifestyle like this, right, like the nazir, it's a sin. You have to bring a sin offering. Because to live that way, more than just for one stint, to live that way in any kind of perpetuity, that's not the way we're meant to live in this world. We're meant to learn how to take the physical part of this world and to elevate it. We're meant to learn not how to stop eating chicken on Shabbos, but how to take that chicken on Shabbos and to change it from being just a chicken as to being something that is serving Hashem. That's our job here. Our job is to take this world and to elevate this world. But there are moments in our lives where we have to look at it and say, I'm not cutting that chicken. But to look at it and say that, you know what, there is a certain amount of prioritization. And sometimes we have to let go of some of the very things that we enjoy because we need to grow. But don't do that too often. And that's why we call it a chet. We call it a sin. You have to bring a sin offering so that we don't get caught up in that and say, maybe this is the lifestyle I'm supposed to live. Maybe I'm supposed to go live on the top of a mountain in Tibet and sit on top of a mountain and contemplate my navel for the rest of my life. Maybe that's the way, and just drink a little water, and that's it, a little bit of carob, and that's what I'm supposed to do. Not at all, never. But when I say never as a lifestyle, but sometimes as a pathway, we need that. And we need that reminder that sometimes if you feel like you're not growing, then you need to focus on your growth, which means that you have to let some things go, that you have to prioritize. And that's okay. And the Mishna is presenting to me a pathway to grow in excellence. There's a certain midah characteristic that a person wants to grow in. I heard such a crazy thing. I can't tell the whole story. Not yet. But I can tell you that I heard it last night, and it was from the person. Person had a reason to confront their life. They unfortunately lost a child, and they were looking at their entire life. And one day when I tell the whole story, the story is even the story is really dramatic. And it's not so much in the events, but in the understanding. But the person was analyzing, and suddenly, while he was talking to me, it became crystal clear to him that he had a certain talent, and he lost the talent, and he can tell you the day, the time, he lost the expertise in the talent. He was still, people would never know. The person played a certain instrument, the people would think, wow, the guy was like amazing. But for himself, he knew that he had lost that touch. He had a certain touch, and he had lost the touch. And then he said, just a little while ago, it came back to him. And it's like, he says, like a gift of God. It just came back to him. And he's able to do certain things with this instrument that are, that it was a violin, whatever. It was like, it was like, what it goes, Isaac Perlman, what was the guy's name? Right, that it was that kind of status. Like he actually studied with him, and whatever. So he had that kind of incredible talent. So he was looking at his life, and he said, 40 years, I lost this ability. He said, and I know why. And the reason why I lost it was because my midos, my character, said I had certain terrible character traits, and they were exacerbated by this expertise. A certain sense of entitlement, a certain sense of haughtiness, and the fact that I had this expertise only made it that much worse. And he said, it feels like HaKadosh Baruch Hu took it away from me. And the guy became religious, and for 40 years he's been learning Torah. He's just been like totally immersed in a Torah life. And he says, now all of a sudden God says to me, good, you made that change? Now you're ready to take this thing back. And he needed that focus on Torah. And he said because of that he didn't touch the instrument in Kemat 40 years. He didn't touch the instrument because he needed to focus on something other than the thing that brought him great pleasure and great joy. Now, he wasn't saying it was his decision, this is the way it happened, but he was able to analyze it and look at it and say, now I understand why I couldn't, because I couldn't focus on the two things at the same time. I never would have changed myself had I still had that talent and been able to do certain things with that talent. Sometimes we have to recognize that if we want to accomplish something in ourselves, we don't like the way we talk to people. We don't like the anger level that we have. We don't like the impatience that we have with other people. It needs focus, which means that there are other things in our lives that need to be pared down so that we can put that kind of proper focus on the things that we need to focus on. And that's the way that the Mishna is presenting to us. It's not telling me a mitzvah. It's not telling me the way you got to learn Torah. What the Mishna is telling me is, it's explaining to me a concept. And the concept can be applied to medicine, the concept can be applied to law, the concept can be applied to Torah, the concept can be applied to our character, to growing ourselves as human beings. If you want to do that, then you need to focus on it. When you focus on it, you have to prioritize. And sometimes things that normally would be things that would bring us pleasure and enjoyment, sometimes some of those things have to be pulled away. Sometimes some of those things have to go. You know, it's a fascinating thing. The Rambam says that if you want to get something to stand in the middle, the Rambam talks about the middle of the road. Not quite the way we talk about the middle of the road in Judaism, but the Rambam talks about that every characteristic that you have has to be in the middle. You have to be normal. You have to be in the middle. But sometimes we are in an extreme of bad. How do you get that? So a person's like very angry. How do you get to a place like you're a normal person? You get upset a few things, you're good with things. How do you get there? Truth is, on anger, the Rambam says you have to be all the way to the other side. You can't be in the middle. But on most other characteristics, patience. A person's patience. So a person is like the most impatient person in the world. Right? Their favorite word is no, right? They're just totally impatient. So how do you get to the middle? So the way that you get to the middle is move to California, and you gotta pull yourself to the total other side. You gotta become completely chilled out, like totally and completely relaxed and chilled out. It's no problem, everything's great, and then you'll end up somewhere in the middle. The Rambam is medama. He compares it to a tree. Now, if you have a tree that's listing to one side, so then you can't just take the tree and tie it in the middle, because then it's when you take the ties off, the tree's going to go back to that side. But when you take the tree and you tie it completely to the other direction, and you leave it there and train it to grow that way, then when you take the ties off, so then it'll end up back in the middle. Sometimes we have to go to an extreme, and that's what the Mishna is saying. The Mishna is saying, drinking a little bit of water, sleeping on the ground, and eating a little bit of bread and salt, that's not a sustainable lifestyle. You can't live that way. That's what the Mishna is saying. The Mishna is saying that in order to be able to achieve a specific goal, so then sometimes we have to do that. Beautiful. Now comes the question, who's the Mishna talking to? Is the Mishna talking to people that are rich? Is the Mishna talking to people that are poor? Who's the Mishna addressing? That sometimes you have to drink a little bit of water. Who's it talking about? So I'll tell you an amazing story, and then I'll answer the question. Rav Meir Shapiro, without launching into my usual discussion and description of who Rav Meir Shapiro was a Rav in Lublin. He created the first yeshiva in the world with a dormitory. The yeshiva still stands today. If you go to Lublin, you can go into the yeshiva. I had many great experiences inside of that yeshiva, and he was a totally unique person. And his other claim to fame was that he started Daf Yomi. It was his idea to start the Daf Yomi program, the studying 2 sides of a page of Talmud every single day, in order to be able to complete the Talmud in 7.5 years. It was a seminal moment in Judaism, in the entire Jewish people. Today, Daf Yomi and the study of Talmud has become something that is so basic to every Jewish community and to serious Jewish life that it is not to be believed. Talmud is a difficult thing, and a lot of times it's not openable. But between Art Scroll and this Daf Yomi program, it is off the charts. Anyway, Rav Meir Shapiro was collecting for his, and I could speak, for a couple of hours on that, as I've done in the past. But I just want to get to a point. Rav Meir Shapiro was collecting money for the yeshiva, and he went to a rich guy's house, and he comes into the house, and the rich guy says to him like this: "I understand that the boys in the yeshiva have everything they need." Rav Meir Shapiro didn't spare any expense. He built what was in those days, something that was very high end. And was beautiful, because he felt the reason that he built a yeshiva with a dormitory, because he felt that people were treating yeshiva bachrim in a very negative kind of light, because yeshiva bachrim had to eat by other people's houses, which means that they had to rely on other people, and the fact that they had to rely on other people and other people's lives, people felt like it was a burden. This kid is sleeping in my house and I got to feed him once a week. Like a burden. I don't have enough food to feed my kids, and I'm feeding this guy. The whole thing was ugly. And but that was the system. So he built a yeshiva so that people should, the covet of Torah, the honor of Torah should go back to its place. So the guy says to him, I understand that everybody was, all your kids are taken care of, and there's, they're living in really in great luxury in that yeshiva. He says, but nowhere in the Torah does it say that you have to learn Torah in luxury. As a matter of fact, he says to him, that it says in the Mishna, and he quotes in this Mishna, Kachi Dakashon. He's quoting this to Rabbi Meir Shapiro, as if Rabbi Meir Shapiro doesn't know. That's what it says in the Mishnah? Oh, thank you for telling me, I didn't know, right? So he tells Rabbi Meir Shapiro that, it says that you have to drink water, sleep on the ground, and therefore, what do you need so much money for? So Rabbi Meir Shapiro says something brilliant to him. He says to him, there are many psukim in the Torah. But the psukim, the verses in the Torah, are for different people. He says, for example, there is a verse in Mishlei that the verse says that the borrower is a slave to the lender. Now, what's that verse telling me in the most simplest way? That don't abuse your master. If you borrow money, you have to be a mensch. You have to treat him with respect from the guy you borrowed the money from. Right? You can't blow him off. You can't expect him to forgive the debt. No, you're a slave to him. You owe him, and you're responsible to him. Okay, great. So that pasuk makes a lot of sense in the terms of the borrower. But what happens if the lender would use that pasuk? 2:00 in the morning, he goes into the borrower and he says, "Get up and clean my toilets." So the borrower says, "What are you talking about?" Because it says in Mishlei that a borrower is a slave to the lender. In other words, if you use that pasuk in the wrong way, if you use that verse in the wrong way, that verse could be a very dangerous thing. And he brings him a few other examples, and he shows him that you have to know who the verse is speaking to. And then he goes on, and he says, "Look at our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, Pas b'melach tochal, that bread you have to eat with salt and sleep on the ground and all that." He says, who is that talking to? He says, that's talking to the learner of Torah. To the person that wants to excel in Torah, that is putting all of their koach, all of their efforts and energy into excelling in Torah, then this is what they got to do. They got to focus. But this pasuk is not talking to the supporter of Torah. The supporter of Torah, to him we say a different Mishnah. To him we say ha'amidu talmidim harbe, that you have to stand up many students. You have to support and make sure that many students are going to be able to benefit from Torah. But Rabbi Meir Shapiro didn't stop there. He said to him, read the end of this Mishnah. The end of this Mishnah says that im ata osakein, that if you live this way, that you drink, you hold back a little bit, and that you focus a little bit on what you're doing, so then ashrecha v'tovlach. If you are a Torah learner and this is the way you live, ashrecha v'tovlach. But if you're not a Torah learner and you demand other people to live this way, so then that's not tovlach. That's not a great thing. Everything has to be understood in context. Now, needless to say, Rabbi Shapiro was very successful with this with this ask, and he got a tremendous amount of money from this person, because the person needed to understand that there are certain things that are geared and guided towards certain people. This kind of advice is geared towards a specific type of person. It's not telling us a mitzvah, not telling us an obligation. It's telling us if we want to accomplish X, then we need to do Y. If you want to excel in something, the only thing that's going to get you there is total focus. Taking the important things and putting them in the foreground, and taking the unimportant things and putting them in the background. And in that way, you have the chance of succeeding. One last idea. The Mishnah says, actually I have about 10 more ideas, but I'm not going to have time now. But I want to leave with one thing. The Mishnah says, Chaye tsar tichya, which just that line is very disturbing. That we have to live a life of pain. I have to look for pain? Flagellate myself? What does it mean, Chaye tsar tichya? That a life of tsar, a life of pain and trouble. As we mentioned before, we're not supposed to look for life of trouble. So I think what the Mishnah is telling me, you know when we say in the Shema, V'yahavta as Hashem Elokecha, you have to love the Lord your God, b'chol ma'odecha, b'chol mida u'mida, our rabbis say. With every measure that God gives you, you have to serve Him. Whether it's pleasant, whether it's not so pleasant, whether it seems great or it's not so great, with whatever comes our way, we're obligated, V'yahavta as Hashem Elokecha, to love God. I think that this mission is also telling us that if pas b'melech tochal, if your life leads you to a place that unfortunately all you have is a little bit of bread and salt and a little bit of rationed water and you're sleeping on the floor, v'chai tsar, and the life is a life of tsar, you have a lot of pain, tichya. Nevertheless, you still have to live. Nevertheless, you still have to recognize that you're alive. And that even life with tsar is still considered life. And that doesn't let you off the hook of your obligation, which is u'b'Torah ata omel. That your obligation is to still excel in Torah. Just because you're in poverty, just because you're in pain, just because you have a difficulty does not get you off the hook and doesn't tell you that your life is worthless. No life is a worthless life. No breathing, no living is worthless. And even if, I think the wording in the Mishnah is so beautiful, that even if chaye tsar, even if there's so much pain of existence, tichya, you have to find the gift, you have to find the opportunity, and tichya, you still have to live through it. Okay, I could have spent a little more time on that, but that's what I see the Mishnah is telling us. The Mishnah is telling us a pathway. You want to excel, focus, prioritize, and even when life hurts, tichya, find the blessing in it and still continue to live and to get the blessing out of life. Okay, we'll stop there. Next week, again, there's no class next week. I'll try to tell the office early enough that they can post that, and then the following Monday we'll continue. And the following Monday, thank God, it won't be at 4:30 in the morning because you will have changed your clocks also. So life will get back to normal.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Okay,
Thank you, Rabbi.
it's so great to see everybody.
Thank you. You
Thanks,
too.
Rabbi.
See you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, it's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Rabbi, can you send me Mishle? I cannot find the Mishle on the YouTube somehow.
Okay, so try this before I send it to you. Try this. Go in YouTube,
Yeah,
type in Rabbi Jeff Wohlgelernter,
okay. I did it. I do it.
and where does that send you?
It's YouTube, but not Mishle. Not
So if you scroll down on there, you'll see. If you go to my channel, I think even in the bulletin there's a link to my channel. But if you go to my channel, to my YouTube channel, so then you'll see all the history of all of my classes.
I don't know.
I'll send you a link. I'll send you a link to that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, Blinette, I'll send you a link. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, take care.
All the best. Sei gesund.
And to you.
All right, thank you.
Okay,
Thank
good
you,
night, guys.
Rabbi.
I'm going to shut down, and then we'll watch Gold. I'll shut down, then we'll start Daf Yomi. Okay, then so everybody, yeah. Yes.
Did you? This is Rachel Emmons. I sent you my email address 2 weeks ago. Did you happen to get a chance to email me?
No, I will believe nether. Take a look at that today. Okay, believe nether. I'll try to do that today.
Do you still need me to put in my email address in the chat?
Just why don't you just send me your email address again? This way I know I've got it easy.
Okay, can you give me yours?
Mine is RJ FROM LJ RJ from LJ at AOL.com.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Wohlgelernter.
Okay, my pleasure. Okay, so I'm cutting out of this, guys, and then we can rejoin.
Thank you.